So a couple of months ago, I asked you to send me some questions for a kind of commemorative video for our 100th video on YouTube, and you really came through. So much so that I'm actually going to split this into 2 videos because one video would just be too long. Let's get into your questions. First up, a few questions from Beanhead, who's a very frequent contributor to the forum. First question: how much is enough? Just kidding. Well, this is actually the most important question in personal finance. How much do you need? How much is going to be enough for you? And not knowing the answer to this question causes all sorts of stress and trouble and heartache for people. So figuring out how much you need is really important. We've actually done a video about this in the past as well, but basically there's no single answer. There's no kind of formula I can give you like, oh, you need 20 times your annual salary or something like that. That's nonsensical because it very much depends on your situation. If you're interested, check out the video. I'll link in the description below. 2, how important is keeping cash in different currencies, especially if you're planning to stay in Japan? I'm not sure it's very important at all because foreign exchange movements are almost impossible to predict. We don't know what's going to happen, so any kind of guessing on that front is basically speculation. If you're going to be in Japan, if your expenses are going to be in Japan, then yen is perfectly fine. Now, the one situation where you might want to keep some money in a foreign currency is if you're planning to visit that country or if you still have expenses in that country, then having that currency to spend there might be useful. Otherwise, it's not something I worry about very much. Aha! How complicated is the process in Japan to declare foreign inheritances and pay tax on them? I believe it's basically the same as doing that with inheritances in Japan. So the issue is going to be, it might be difficult to get the paperwork in the right format or the right information that you need for the Japanese authorities. But the process, I think, is the same. Where's the best place to get advice on the taxes involved? Well, the tax office can help you, or if you have a large inheritance or you have a complicated situation, perhaps some kind of specialist would help. But it's quite hard to find people who know about taxes in Japan and other countries, and therefore they're quite expensive when you do find them. Now, 2 things to watch out for on this topic. One is that the way inheritance tax in Japan works is that you pay inheritance tax on the value of the property, and then later if you sell it, you pay capital gains tax based on the initial purchase price. So not the price it was when you inherited it, but the actual initial purchase back in whenever. So that is definitely something to watch out for. That could be a very unpleasant surprise for some people. All right, on the same topic of taxes, tax when selling house. Well, this is actually not too bad. Basically, if you sell a house or an apartment or real estate and you make a profit, i.e. the price has gone up since you bought it and you sell it for more than you bought it for, then you would pay capital gains tax. And in Japan, capital gains tax for property is either short-term, so that's less than 5 years, and that is about 40%, it's quite high, or long-term, more than 5 years, and that is the 20.315%, which is what we pay on stock market investments, regardless of how long we've had them. So this short and long-term capital gains thing only applies to property in this case. There are some other taxes like, stamp duty or the tax, the fees for registering the property, but they're not as significant as the capital gains might be. And if you're selling your home, so if you're selling the house that you live in, there is a special tax deduction for that of up to 30 million yen. So the first 30 million yen in profit that you make on selling your home, you don't have to pay tax on. There are some conditions on this, so please do check with the tax office or an accountant before making any decisions, but that's a broad idea of what you might have to pay. Next, some really astute questions from Gymnasium, also from the forum. Is there anything you've changed your mind or your opinion on since starting RetireJapan? Well, all sorts of things. I think the biggest one though is that I have really simplified my thinking, both on investing and basically on providing information and advice to people. So originally I tried to give people all the information possible to allow them to make an informed decision, And since then, I've basically been simplifying and simplifying and simplifying, because I think most people don't want all the information. They just want a simple plan that they can try and implement immediately. And that's what I've been focusing on recently, especially with the courses and the guides and so on. Try to simplify just to make it easier for people to take action and get some momentum. Hindsight being 2020, are there some things you wish you'd done earlier after moving to Japan? For me, the main one is health. So I really wish I'd put more effort into my health consistently during my time in Japan. So I've always done something, you know, I used to run, I used to cycle, I swam for a bit, I've done jiu-jitsu and so on, but I've never been consistent with it. And it would have been so much better to have done these things consistently, even to a lesser degree than I actually did them, rather than, you know, do something and then stop and then do something else and then stop and then do something else. And this applies equally to money, of course. So consistency, getting some basic habits and doing it month in, month out is going to give you the best results possible. So next up, 2 questions about what happens to your accounts, your bank accounts, your broker accounts when you leave Japan. So partially this is going to depend on the policies of your bank or broker or financial institution. Some banks will ask you to close your accounts immediately if you leave Japan, same brokers, same thing. Others might be more nuanced. So the big exception for many institutions is going to be if you leave Japan temporarily on a work assignment or something like that. So your company transfers you overseas for, you know, a period of 2 years. In that situation, a lot of banks and brokers are willing to work with you. They might freeze the account, but you'll be able to keep it open and start using it again when you come back. If you leave Japan indefinitely, you don't have a plan, you don't have a kind of specific work reason to leave Japan, it might be more difficult to keep things open. With banks, a lot of people basically just don't tell their bank, and often the bank doesn't notice. So, but recently with the whole know your customer thing that's happening more and more these days, made a video about it last week. Then when the banks send out the survey to check your address, to check your status and so on, and it comes back and it's not delivered, or you don't fill in the survey, then you might have accounts frozen and even closed. But it's going to depend on your bank's policies. All right, Zande is asking about points for credit cards. So how to use credit cards in Japan. I think for most people, the easiest option is just going to be get a low cost or free credit card that gives you points or cash or some kind of points that you can use as cash, and just use that for all your spending. So use it for your bills, for your shopping and so on, and that'll give you a return of, you know, 1, maybe 2% on your day-to-day spend. You don't have to think about it. It's not going to cost you any money. As long as you're careful not to overuse the credit card, that's probably the best option. Now, if you have a special interest in something, and for me, that would be kind of luxury travel. So I have a Marriott Amex card, an American Express card, because that helps me get status with Marriott. That gets us room upgrades, that gets us late checkout. We can transfer the points to airline miles with a whole bunch of different airlines and use them that way to get upgraded seats and so on. And that's basically interesting to me, because when I travel, as I get older, I like to travel in a bit more comfort and so on. So that's important for me. So I'm happy to have this more expensive credit card and to jump through these hoops to use these points and use these miles. Now, most people don't need to do that, especially if they're not particularly interested. So it's going to depend on your situation, how much utility you're going to get from the points compared to the cost of acquiring them. But again, for most people, I think, you know, a free or a cheap card like a Rakuten credit card or an Amazon credit card is probably going to be the way to go. Now, the next question is really interesting. So it's basically, how can we use yen to invest in the US stock market, given that the yen is getting weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker? And I think the important thing here is to come back to a really important concept, which is if you're buying something, the currency that you buy it with doesn't matter, because the value is decided by the value of the underlying asset. So if you're going to buy the US stock market, for example, the S&P 500, it doesn't matter if you buy a US dollar denominated ETF or you buy a Japanese yen denominated mutual fund, because it's going to cost you the same amount of money. In the first case, you're changing your money into dollars and buying the same asset. In the second case, you're buying the same asset with yen. It's the same thing. So you don't have to worry about the currency for that. In the current situation, some people are choosing to stop buying world stock funds perhaps, and instead buy Japanese either stock funds or individual stocks in Japan, because they think in the future the yen will strengthen again, and therefore this is going to work out better for them. But we don't know what's going to happen with the yen. We don't know if this is the new normal. We don't know if the yen is going to fall further. We don't know if the yen is going to strengthen. So absent that knowledge, I choose to just keep doing the same thing, which is to keep buying those same mutual funds, those world stock mutual funds, every month consistently in my NISA account, and I don't really worry about the exchange rate and so on. Next, is it possible for US citizens to collect Social Security in Japan? Yes, so there's a website that lets you check this. Apparently it depends on which country you live in. So some countries you can receive Social Security and some countries you can't. I went through the website, and apparently for Japan, as long as you've qualified, so you've paid in enough to Social Security to be able to receive a payment, you can do so from Japan. This is a great question and really timely. So basically, right now the eMaxis Slim range of mutual funds in Japan are really popular. They're a decent option, but what happens in the future? Would they become less competitive perhaps? Is there going to be a better option? And I would say, I don't think so. So right now, if we look at the eMaxis Slim All Country Fund, so the whole world stock fund in their range, the fees used to be very low. So they used to be 0.011%, I think. And then a competitor fund came out that was 0.005%, so half as much as eMaxis Slim. And people got quite excited about that. So what did MUFGA do? They matched the new fund. So the fees for the eMaxis Slim fund have been cut in half to 0.005%, which is basically almost the same as zero now. The fees can't get much lower. I don't believe the fees would go up. So in terms of the individual investor who's buying this fund, I don't think you have to worry too much about it becoming non-competitive. You certainly don't have to sit there monitoring it or anything. If something changed in a big way, we'll certainly be talking about it on RetireJapan. So on the blog, on the videos and so on. So if you just peripherally stay aware of what we're talking about here, you'd find that news out. But I can't see anything particularly major happening to that fund in the future. So how are non-Japanese expats funding their retirement? So the normal pattern in Japan in the past has been save up cash, work for a company for 30, 40 years, get a retirement bonus, get your taishokukin, use that taishokukin to maybe pay off the house and have some cash to supplement your nenkin, which you're also getting. And that would give you a kind of middle class lifestyle. And I think that works. You might have some insurance policies on top of that. Now, I think much more effective would be to invest using Ideco and NISA to supplement your nenkin, supplement if you get a taishokukin retirement bonus or not. And that's what I see most people doing. So they've got their pensions, whether that's nenkin or a foreign state pension. They've probably got some kind of investments. They might have some cash savings. They might have property here or abroad. And it's that mixture of income and savings and investments that's going to get you through your retirement. Now, in practice, however much money you have, you're going to make it work for yourself. People that don't have those kind of resources are just going to have a lower standard of living and they're going to muddle through. So if you are a non-Japanese resident in Japan, you're not entitled to seikatsu hogo, which is kind of financial assistance from the state for people in poverty. But you are able to receive it if your local authority deems that necessary. And most of the time they seem to do that anyway. But I wouldn't want to rely on that. And that's the whole ethos of RetireJapan, is to help people make plans and get ready for retirement. Mark Kennedy, who has a very interesting Substack that we feature on the Monday Read from time to time, asks, how do you see local public services changing in the future, in the long term, with the shrinking population? And I think we can see this already. So even in Miyagi, where we have, a fairly big city, Sendai, and then we've got the rural municipalities around it, the municipalities have been merging. And as the population falls, it becomes more and more difficult to maintain infrastructure. So I can imagine in the future that we'll see lots of the current kind of villages and towns will basically be abandoned. The population will move into or close to the cities, and that's where we'll have, infrastructure, and then anyone living outside that would have to be basically off the grid. They'd have to have their own electricity, their own water, and so on. It would be more difficult to access things like deliveries, government services, hospitals, and all the rest of it. But I think it's probably not a bad thing to have the population concentrated in urban areas, just from an efficiency point of view and a cost point of view. It's much cheaper to have infrastructure in a highly densely populated area than spread out through the countryside. Yeah, I can't imagine Japan maintaining all these small towns that are, the average age is like 70 or 80 in there. I think in 10, 20 years time, those towns basically won't exist. And the last one from Zeroshiki. So what's your step-by-step? Just do this and don't worry about anything else. Yeah, I've been perfecting that. As I said, I've been simplifying the message. So basically, if you want to get your finances in order, don't spend all your money, save and invest some of it, as much as you can, at least 10%, but preferably 20. Invest it in something sensible, like a low-fee diversified stock fund. Use NISA and iDeCo if you can, and just do that as long as you can. Do that for decades, and you'll be in a very, 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 very comfortable position in the future. And hopefully you won't have had to make too many sacrifices along the way. What do you wish people could unlearn about investing? Well, I think a lot of people have this image of investing, that it's difficult, that it's dangerous, that it's risky, that you can succeed massively. So it's more like a casino, whereas in fact, my experience of investing is it's really boring, but it's not particularly risky, and you can get very decent results just by setting up a really basic system and just doing it consistently. So I guess I hope more people will understand that investing is not glamorous or interesting or incredibly rewarding, but rather it's dull. It's more like insurance than a casino, I would say, in my opinion. And what's your biggest challenge when trying to help people? I think it's still reaching everyone. So I started RetireJapan to try and help people, to provide information, to provide support, and so on. And I still come across loads of people that have never heard of it, or haven't seen it, or they're not aware of the resources we have on the site. So I think that's our biggest challenge, basically. We're not visible enough. So that's something I've been working on. That's why I started the YouTube channel, to try and get us a bit more visibility that way. So if you've got friends who are not aware of RetireJapan, please tell them about us, and hopefully that will help them work on their finances and get themselves into a slightly better financial situation. So thank you so much for sending in your questions. If you have more questions, you can put them in the comments below, because I'll be doing the second part of this video soon, and if I get any new good questions, I'll include those as well. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.